He also writes, the Federal Reserve System is not federal, it has no reserves, and it is not a system, but rather a criminal syndicate.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what would we say? Basically, all currencies were a contract to gold or other monetary metal. And then once you divorce that, you've basically violated contract. So any business that's in the enterprise of printing money is violating the property rights of everyone that holds the money. So it's a giant criminal enterprise. He also writes, the power to create money out of nothing and loan it at interest is the greatest power on earth, which reminds me of Ron Paul saying that the power to print money is the most sought after monopolistic power of man. So that's why we get all of this darkness and temptation wrapped up around it, because it is people in pursuit of absolute power.
Yeah, and that's a low frequency activity. And it was so obvious to the men back then. This is what Woodrow Wilson, who was coerced into sponsoring this, said within 3 years of that passing. He said, "I'm a most happy man. I've unwittingly ruined my country. The greatest industrial nation is now controlled by a system of credit. We are no longer a government of free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and vote of the majority, but a government by opinion and duress of a small group of dominant evil men."
Yeah.
So I don't know what more people need to hear to just collectively put out there in the consciousness that we need to end central banking. It does nothing for humanity.
Yeah. And again, it's one of these things that has been sold to us as a solution, and it's actually it's the arsonist claiming to be a firefighter type of situation. Okay, let's talk about the Fed like today. So obviously founded 1913, 1971, after you said World War II, ends 1944. We hold the Bretton Woods Conference. The United States becomes...
Bretton Woods, this is even earlier. Bretton Woods happened before the end of the war. So these J-offs were so cocky that they got together and had a meeting basically creating the first part of the petrodollar, but saying, all right, Winston, you're effed. Sorry, Rothschilds, even though you own 16% of this bank, your pound's not going to be the currency. The dollar is going to be the currency. And that's our trade for getting American men slaughtered in World War II, which was just a central banking war. Had nothing to do with Hitler, actually. Very little to do with Hitler. So the only part that did was his economic miracle from 1933 to 1938, where he was competing with the other empires, and they didn't like that. And you can cite all the papers from the 1935 to 38 where they're calling for boycotts of German goods. That's both World War I and World War II were because of the German efficiency and mastery with machinery. They didn't like competition. And so what that's come into now from its first iterations at Bretton Woods were 1970, Charles de Gaulle from France says, I'm calling bullshit, folks. You don't have the gold to back this currency that you're making us use. Well, what happened 11 months later? Nixon gets on national television, I believe it was August 14th, 1971, give or take, and says, we're temporarily, it's decades later, removing the dollar's peg to gold. Because at that time, the peg was fixed from 44 at 35 bucks an ounce. And that's really what caused the hyperinflationary. If some of you were alive in the 70s, that was one of the worst periods in human history. Now we're catching up to that, and we're about to have another big hyperinflationary wave.
It set us up for the savings and loan crisis of the 80s.
Which was stroke of pen.
Right.
All of this cartelism is all about eliminating competition and confiscation of assets.
Yes. Yeah, so 1944, the United States rewrites the banking rules. Sounds like before, actually, the end of the war.
Global commerce rules.
Yeah, so the United States and the Fed become the central bank of the earth, effectively, by making the dollar redeemable for gold and all other currencies pegged to the dollar, right? That system persisted until 1971 when Nixon said, you know what? Enough people asked for their gold. He said no more gold redeemability, and we go on to this fiat standard temporarily that we're still on 53 years later. And so when currency cannot be redeemed for gold, then governments can print it ad infinitum. So it's like it's a perpetually violated contract. It's a confidence game. It really is just a pyramid scheme ultimately, right? That there's a It's a video of a New Zealand central banker, I think, where he says, central banking is a great business. We print money and people believe it.
Right.
And that pretty much sums it up. It's like, if you believe it and you hold it in the bank, then you make it real, right? That is the reservation demand that gives it value. But underlying that value is actually nothing whatsoever. Mm-hmm. No gold, no energy, nothing.
Yeah. You're right to feel uneasy if you're not thoroughly versed with this space. But it's so obvious that once you resonate with this truth, all of the other things that have spawned out of this, Satan was basically birthed right here. It's like spawn of Satan will then become apparent, like the 100,000 plus chemicals that RFK is going after here in our food. The fact that they've convinced women that killing a baby is healthcare, and that there's not a middle that's reasonable and responsible. The fact that we have wars that we haven't declared a war since Vietnam. And we've been all over the world, not for the purposes of the American people, but for the interests of these men and their offspring. Because these men, their offspring still own that bank. Yeah. And then the money center banks like JP Morgan and Citigroup, who also are shareholders in the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, social media censorship, all the distortions in food and healthcare, and basically every industry that uses the corrupt money becomes corrupted and distorted somehow. So this is why I think we're beating this drum so hard. It's like, hey, Bitcoiners say, fix the money, fix the world. If you enjoyed this clip, click here for the full episode and here for more just like it. Also, like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money and subscribe to stay connected. Thank you.